Hello YouTube. When you ask people about their favorite Imperial dynasty in the Elder Scrolls universe, most people often answer the Septim dynasty. It's by far the most well documented of the Imperial dynasties and definitely among the most interesting. Now today me and the other Elder Scrolls YouTuber ItsTimeBomb have teamed up to talk about the story of every emperor and empress in the Septim dynasty. We will do it both in our own unique style and we hope that you enjoy it. So with that said, let's talk about the Septim dynasty. So, the Septim dynasty. You may think that we need to start with Tiber Septim, first of the Septim emperors, but we won't, as there's one man who some call Emperor Zero of the Septim Empire. That man was a king of Falkreath during the long interregnum between the end of the Roman Empire and start of the Septim Empire. That man was King Cuchulainn, the king of Falkreath in the final days of the Second Era. You see, Falkreath at the time was politically part of Cyrodiil, and Cuchulainn, after coming to power, started to try and unite northern Cyrodiil under his own rule, as he saw Falkreath, some areas of Skyrim, and the northern Colovian regions of Cyrodiil as one entity which should be united under one strong leader, himself. Now this all went rather well. He conquered parts of Skyrim, parts of the Reach and large parts of northern Cyrodiil. And all in all, it was a good time for him, all things considered. And one of the reasons that things went so well was that he had a mighty general that won many of his battles for him with the power of the Thuum, or the voice, using dragon shouts, and becoming a bit of a folk hero who most likely already at this time became a bit more popular than the king himself. That man was Uriel Earlybeard, but some people knew him best under his nickname General Talos Stormcrown. Now, like I said, General Talos became quite popular and was by far the best asset that Cuchulainn had in war, sending him to fight his battles across northern Tamriel. Eventually, as Cuchulainn ordered General Talos to take the holy city of Sancretor in northern Cyrodiil, which was the place where Reman Cyrodiil, the first dragonborn emperor of the last empire, had once been found as a baby with the amulet of kings on his brow, there history repeated itself, and within the sack of Sancretor, Talos found the amulet of kings and he could wear it. Now, we don't know much about this period of time and the exact relation between Talos and Cuchulainn, but at this point we know that many already consider Talos the true ruler, as he had the dragon blood and was chosen by the Amulet of Kings, which proved his claim to the Cyrodiilic throne. Now, we don't know how King Cuchulainn felt, but I would think that even he would have noticed that his general was far more popular and supported than he was. However, it never came to a real headbutting between the two for power, as Cuchulainn was assassinated under very mysterious circumstances. You see, eventually Cuchulainn and General Talos conquered the Imperial city, and Cuchulainn wanted to have himself crowned as emperor, only for him to be assassinated at the very last minute and for General Talos to take his crown, naming himself Emperor Tiber Septim. Now, the official records tell us that a Reachman Nightblade likely murdered the Emperor, as Tiber Septim himself was also wounded in the attempt. Specifically, his throat was slit, leading to his vocal cords being damaged and him never being able to use the Thuum or the voice again, even though he survived. But, you know, me personally, I kinda suspect Tiber Septim to be behind it still, as Cuchulainn had been his only barrier to supreme power left, and perhaps his own wound was simply an accident, or perhaps Tiber Septim wanted to do the deed of assassination himself, and Cuchulainn fought back. Well, I suppose we will never know, although we do know that not everyone agrees with that interpretation, as some people think Tiber Septim did nothing wrong and was innocent.
Free Tiber Septim, he didn't do anything wrong. Greetings, travelers. My name's ItsTimeBomb, and our friend Imperial and I have decided to tackle the Septim Empire together. And of course, we're going to be starting with the first of the 22 emperors, the legendary Tiber Septim, also known as Talos Stormcrown, Uriel Earlybeard, and Tiberius Imperator. Tiber Septim was a man whose appearance was described as average height with a winning smile and bright blue eyes, combined with a strong brow and a powerful chin. Revered by many as the greatest emperor in Tamrielic history, with a face you will see daily during your travels, from the gold pieces you carry in your pouch to the statue in Whiterun that is doomed to an eternity of Heimskir's voice. Though keep in mind, much of Tiber Septim's earlier life is pretty obscure, and what we think we do know about it has been long debated years after his death. Before Tiber Septim's 81-year reign even began, it was prophesized many times. One of these times in particular being in Sermon 19 of the 36 Lessons of Vivek, where it is stated stated that while the gods Vivek and Nerevar had separately stepped into the Provisional House, which is a realm described as, quote, non-spatial space filling to capacity with moral interaction and information. Make sense of that what you will. Both Vivek and Nerevar had separately had the same vision of a twin-headed king who had no equivalent, and Vivek would further describe him as the Red Jewel of Conquest. This vision was a prophecy of Tiber Septim, and the twin head is believed to be Zurin Arctis, a spellcaster in the late Second Era and better known as the Imperial battle mage of Tamriel under Tiber Septim's rule. These two legendary names being so intertwined with each other became collectively known as the Enantiomorph, who as one united entity strengthened the Imperial throne and as a result fortified all of Tamriel. But regardless of the legends, he was just a regular mortal man, even though he was destined to do great things. Before he came to be known as Tiber Septim, he was born in the Bretons' ancestral homeland of Atmora by the name of Talos, spending his youth in Skyrim where the Nordic chieftains taught him their complicated strategies of war as well as the fabled and ancient art of the tongues. And at the age of 20, he put this knowledge to use by leading the invasion of Old Hraldan, in which his armies successfully reclaimed the land from the Witchmen of High Rock, and this would come to be known as his earliest known military accomplishment. And soon after this victory, violent storms started brewing. Nearby villages were being evacuated, and this was all an indication that the Greybeards were about to speak. So Talos traveled up the steps to High Hrothgar, where the Greybeards told Talos of a prophecy that he would become the ruler of all of Tamriel. But for that to happen, he must first go south. Skipping forward a bit, Talos ends up becoming the general of the western half of Cyrodiil, known as the Colovian Estates, where he served under the late Cuchulainn. I'm sorry, I'm gonna butcher a lot of names in this one, so smash like. Cuchulainn, who is widely regarded as Emperor Zero of the Septim Dynasty. And it is here that Talos met the combined army of Skyrim and High Rock, who were already at violent odds with Cuchulainn at this point, and the tide for Cuchulainn's reign would begin to turn when Skyrim's army would bear witness to Talos wielding the Thu'um, which led them to swear their allegiance to him, recognizing him as, quote, the son of Skyrim and heir to the empires of man. However, on the other hand, the Bretons didn't exactly agree with the Nords. And in 2E 854, it is believed that an unknown Reachman Nightblade successfully killed Emperor Cuchulainn. This Nightblade then made an attempt to take Talos' life by slitting his fucking throat. The legendary Talos managed to survive such a fatal injury, but at a great cost. After this attack, Talos could no longer use the Thu'um and would spend the rest of his reign commanding Tamriel with only a whisper. It is at this point that he took the Cyrodiilic name Tiber Septim, as well as Ysmir, the Dragon of the North, which is a Nordic name of kings. And it is from this point that the interregnum ends and the true beginning of the Septim dynasty begins. Tiber Septim fulfills his prophecy and is crowned Emperor of Tamriel by his prophesized twin head, Zurin Arctis, who would play a critical role in the building of the Septim Empire as his Imperial battle mage. And from here, with Tamriel united under one Imperial banner, begins the golden age of Tamriel. Now, with all that out of the way, we could continue to go down the Tiber Septim rabbit hole, but there is so much about him that he could probably have his own like hour-long video. Only thing I especially found worth mentioning is that he, Zurin Arctis, and Ysmir Wolfhearth had managed to take control of the ancient brass god Numidium as a weapon to crush any opposition that stood in their way. And beyond that is a huge laundry list of relics he left behind, cults and religions dedicated to his worship, and plenty of politics. And with that, it's time to pass you on over to Imperial for Pelagius Septim I.
Alright, so after the glorious reign of the first true Septim Emperor, Tiber Septim, his grandson, Pelagius, took the throne, taking the ruling name Pelagius Septim I. In all honesty, despite him being the only Septim Emperor to directly descend from Tiber Septim, as all the others descended from Tiber Septim's brother Agranid instead of the legendary Talos himself, Pelagius as an emperor really wasn't that interesting. He only reigned for about 3 years before being assassinated by the Dark Brotherhood, leaving no children or other heirs directly descended from Tiber Septim. Now, his reign, from the very few things that we know, was a pretty calm and prosperous one. He pretty much continued Tiber Septim's Tamrielic Golden Age, as he pretty much just continued the prosperity and peace that his grandfather started. And while being nervous about ruling at first, he seems to have done an okay job, and he quickly became more confident until some described his leadership style as more or less a continuation as that of his grandfather Tiber Septim. We also know that he had contact with some of the more legendary figures of the Third Era, from Queen Berenzia, whom he grew up with and who he had a bit of a love-hate relationship with, and the Underking, who despite not having, let's say, the best relationship with Tiber Septim according to some sources, was apparently an ally to his grandson Pelagius. Now, like I said before, his reign ended really quickly, as just after 3 years or so he was assassinated by the Dark Brotherhood, and the throne then went to his first cousin once removed, Kintyra Septim, daughter of Tiber Septim's brother, meaning that Tiber Septim's own line ended here. But Mr. TimeBomb will tell you more about Kintyra Septim.
Kintyra Septim is the first of many... Shut up. Kintyra Septim is the first of many in this list that has very little information about her life or her reign as empress. Soon after the news of her first cousin Pelagius' death in 3E41, she claimed her seat at the Ruby Throne and got to work. Before starting her 12-year reign, Kintyra had already achieved an impressive status as Queen of Silvanar, one of the 8 major cities in the province of Valenwood, and during her reign it was described as a period of prosperity and bountiful harvests alongside her love of all forms of art, leading to a flourish in culture throughout the land. This more graceful and artistic period finally came to an end after Kintyra Septim's death in 3E53, and the Ruby Throne was passed to her son Uriel II I.
Now, Uriel II I would reign for a little over 10 years after the death of his mother. After his coronation as emperor, he proved to be quite capable, and he proved to be a kind ruler, who during his reign concerned himself most with reforming and organizing the empire's laws, as the continent-spanning empire was most likely at this point still a bit of a confusing spiderweb mess of local and imperial laws. Now, other than becoming the great lawmaker of the Septim Empire, he also expanded the roles of the Tamrielic White Guilds, like the Fighters Guild and the Mages Guild, and it was under his reign that the empire was most united and centralized, at least compared to the following 300 years or so, in which cracks would start to appear in the empire. Cracks that would start after his reign, when his son, likely named after him, Uriel Septim II, took the throne, as Mr. TimeBomb will tell you now.
Next up is Uriel Septim II. Father of his 3 children Pelagius II, Emil, and Galana Septim, he took his seat at the Ruby Throne in 3E64. Though his 18-year reign isn't as extensively documented as his forefather Tiber Septim's, Uriel Septim II's turn on the Ruby Throne was one of great misfortune and irresponsibility. This period in the Septim dynasty shows the first signs of disunification in the empire, as Uriel II was known to be terribly financially irresponsible alongside the pestilence, sickness, and rebellion that was stirring within the empire. During this time in the empire, there was word of a Khajiit rebellion breaking out in Torval, one of the 8 major cities in Elsewhere, to which the King of Solitude, Manimarco, gave Uriel II millions of septims in order to help fund the suppressing of the Khajiit rebellion. And in exchange for this assistance, Emperor Uriel II agreed to either arrange a marriage between his daughter Galana and Manimarco, or pay back all the gold that was lent to the empire. However, Uriel II's financial irresponsibility came back to haunt him, leaving the empire in debt, and by the end of his reign, the imperial treasury was absolutely bankrupt. Just 2 years before he turned over the Ruby Throne, Uriel's daughter Galana had given birth to his granddaughter Patema, and upon being presented to Uriel II, it was written that he was quick to say, quote, "She looks like a She-Hulk." Shit, my bad. Dug up some bad memories there. Let's try that again. Quote, "She looks like a she-wolf about ready to pounce." Soon after the birth of Patema, an ambassador representing Manimarco had traveled to the Imperial Palace to request that Uriel II honors the marriage agreement. But at this point, Galana was already preparing to marry the Duke of Narcissus, one of the 8 major cities in Morrowind, to which Manimarco had no knowledge of. I just realized I've been saying Manimarco and it's Mantiarco this whole time. I can't see very well. I apologize. So in order to not damage relations between the Kingdom of Solitude and the Empire, Uriel II and his son Prince Pelagius arranged that Mantiarco may instead be married to Patema, the child. Now, I read this part frontward, backward, and inside out, and I can't seem to find anything that indicates the marriage would be put on hold until Patema could eventually, I don't know, think for herself, you know? Instead of just playing with her straw dolls and watching Coco Melon. The hope for that is looking kind of bleak. So after Uriel, I don't know what I'm doing, II died in 3E82, the Ruby Throne was passed on to his son Pelagius II in hopes that he may be able to fix everything his father ruined during his campaign.
And well, Pelagius II definitely tried to fix the Empire's myriad of problems that he inherited from his father, although his fixes weren't always what was best for the Empire as a whole, as he tried to fix the Empire's poor finances by dismissing the entire Elder Council and only letting those that paid the Empire a lot of taxes back on, leading to a division where financially weaker provinces and kingdoms of Tamriel, where the problems were not very well represented in the Empire's government, while the rich and problemless areas were essentially overrepresented in the council. Now, at first this did not seem to be a very big problem. The Empire's finances were back in order and prosperity returned to the land as everyone now paid the Empire to have their say. But as we'll see, this new dynamic between the Emperor and Elder Council made it so that the Elder Council would have far more influence than it had before, and that the division between rich and poor areas in the Empire would lead to more and more cracks in the Empire, and that even those who paid for their seat on the Council would not always be happy with their new Emperor, as they had to pay really outrageous sums of money in order to continue in their positions, while sometimes the Emperor just still did whatever he wanted. Now, other than his solving of the financial situation in the Empire, we know of his reign that he married twice and had a lot of children, among whom were the later emperors Antiochus Septim, his eldest son, Cephorus Septim, the middle son, and Magnus Septim, his youngest son. He also had a daughter that Mr. ItsTimeBomb talked about before, Pelagius Septim, who we will also be talking about again extensively later in this video. Now, we don't know much about his reign beyond his financial reforms, and even the way that he ended up dying was most likely related to his reforms, as it's whispered that he was poisoned by a nobleman who'd been kicked off the Elder Council because he couldn't pay for his seat. Oh well, bad luck. Next emperor, his eldest son, Antiochus Septim.
Welcome to one of the most interesting emperors so far. If you had to describe the Septim dynasty as a movie character, you'd probably say something like Bridgerton, right? Fancy, snooty, royalty type, you know, I don't know. I've actually never seen it. Well, in my opinion, Antiochus Septim is more like specifically Leonardo DiCaprio's character in The Wolf of Wall Street.
There is no nobility in poverty. Shit.
Antiochus Septim, born in 3E51, was known as a well-dressing, womanizing drunkard who was physically described as fat and loaded with STDs. This man could make a flame Atronox piss burn. And all that practice was put to good use because sometime and many wives and mistresses later, Kintyra II was born. After the death of his father Pelagius II, Antiochus was set to be the next ruler of Tamriel, though the Elder Council managed to delay his coronation for at least 6 weeks due to their still burning hatred towards Pelagius II. And it's hard to deny that Antiochus Septim was fascinating as a person, but in a way that put him at a disadvantage during his reign on the Ruby Throne. Because Antiochus's foolish behavior in the eyes of the public made him look weak, and because of this, his 21-year reign was bustling with civil wars, and even surpassing the amount of wars during his financially stupid grandfather Uriel II's reign. And this was a period where many of the kings and queens of Skyrim, High Rock, and Morrowind were all dissatisfied and angry with Antiochus's reign, and things just weren't looking very positive at this point in time. In 3E110, tensions were still growing as the Empire nearly lost the province of the Somerset Isles to the Mortimer, also known as the Sea Elves in the War on the Isle. It was only after the combined navies of the Empire and Somerset Isles joined forces were they able to defeat their attackers, the Piandonian Armada. Piandonia being the land the Mortimer came from, meaning the Veil of Mist. Though it's credited that they were only able to defeat their leader Orgnum and the Piandonian Armada due to a freak storm that legend has it the Sigic Order had possibly helped create to destroy the Piandonians for some reason. After they slapped a "You helped" sticker on his forehead, Antiochus had one major military achievement to his name. And he would live on until 3E119, where during a visit from Patema and Uriel II, Antiochus fell into a coma where he swayed between life and death for months, while the Elder Council made preparations to pass the Ruby Throne to his daughter Kintyra II. And in 3E120, Antiochus finally died, and the Ruby Throne was quickly passed on to Kintyra. Though his reign was full of mistakes and hardships due to his lax attitude of governing and peacekeeping, Antiochus is still remembered fondly by the people for the flawed yet funny and unique emperor that he was.
But unfortunately, the situation after his death was far from funny, as the next two rulers of the Septim dynasty, Antiochus' daughter Kintyra II and the son of Antiochus' sister, Patema, Uriel III, would vie for power over the next few years in the event that would come to be known as the War of the Red Diamond. one of the most damaging civil wars to ever rage across Tamriel, far bigger and bloodier than the Skyrim Civil War, and it's one of the events that did the most damage to the Septim Empire over the course of its existence. Now, I did a full detailed video with a strategy map on the war a few years ago, which I'll put it in the description in case you want to study the war in greater detail. But what happened was that after the death of her father, Antiochus Septim, her aunt, Pelagius Septim, the Queen of Solitude, started to spread rumors around the Imperial court that Kintyra II was in fact an illegitimate child, as Pelagius claimed that both Antiochus and his legitimate wife were both serial adulterers who slept with half of the imperial city but rarely with one another, and thus that Kintyra would be an illegitimate child. As a result of these claims, Pelagius did everything she could for her son Uriel to be recognized by the Elder Council as the best next emperor, while trying to blockade and delay Kintyra's coronation by speeching against her to the Elder Council. However, despite Pelagius' best efforts, she did not gain enough support, so Kintyra, in the end, was crowned Empress Kintyra II, and everyone lived happily ever after. Except no, as Pelagius became enraged and was banished from the court, and as she returned to Skyrim, she started preparing for war by gathering disgruntled nobles and Elder Council members around her son Uriel's claim to the throne. Meanwhile, Kintyra II got married to an Elder Council member, Lord Modulus, and had the full support of her uncles, the other sons of Emperor Pelagius Septim II, Cephorus and Magnus Septim. Now, not even a year after Kintyra's coronation, Pelagius had gathered enough allies, mainly in the north of Tamriel, where the disgruntled nobles are, as Mr. ItsTimeBomb told you. And using the power of these gathered allies, she and her son Uriel opened the attack on the Empire, and Pelagius and her allies in the north started to openly rebel against Kintyra II. Pelagius' forces then swept across High Rock, while forces led by her son Uriel quickly overran much of Skyrim. The young new Empress Kintyra II personally felt responsible, and she decided to fight in the war herself as she answered the call for reinforcements from a noble in High Rock, so she and her forces were shipped to southern High Rock and moved in to confront Pelagius. Little did she know, however, that the request for reinforcements had been one big ploy by Pelagius, who tried to lure Kintyra into an ambush with the help of a High Rock noble who was on Uriel's side. These reinforcements, led by Kintyra herself to High Rock, left Cyrodiil rather vulnerable, while the reinforcing army itself was led into a trap by Pelagius. The ensuing battle between Kintyra's forces and Pelagius' forces led to a devastating defeat for Kintyra II, who was taken captive and was then brutally executed by her aunt, Pelagius' forces, who then took the remainder of High Rock in the absence of any significant imperial reserves in the area. That day would later come to be known as the Day of Broken Diamonds, as many across the Empire mourned their young empress. But with the empress dead and Cyrodiil lightly defended, Uriel swept in with his forces, taking the imperial city and naming himself Emperor Uriel Septim III. What then followed was a bloody 2-year war in which Kintyra II's and Uriel III's uncles, Cephorus and Magnus Septim, started to aggressively rally troops against Pelagius and Uriel's supporters, slowly driving their forces back towards Skyrim. After 2 years of back and forth war, the turning point of the war came when in the Battle of Ishidag on the Hammerfell Plains, Cephorus Septim met Uriel Septim III in battle, while Magnus engaged Pelagius' forces in eastern Skyrim in the Battle of Falconstar. Both of these battles were bloody, and while the Battle of Falconstar was won by Pelagius and her forces, Cephorus Septim managed to rout and defeat Uriel III's forces, and even managed to capture his nephew to put him on trial. Now, unfortunately for Uriel III, he never reached the trial, as the carriage that he was in was assaulted by an angry mob, and his carriage was set on fire with him in it, leading to the death of Uriel III. Now, this did not mean the end of the war, however, as the war would rage on for quite some time. At this point, however, Cephorus Septim, being the eldest remaining heir of Emperor Pelagius Septim II, his father, and Uriel and Kintyra's grandfather, the throne fell to him as the most legitimate heir, and he was crowned Emperor Cephorus Septim I. While he and his brother Magnus continued to push back Pelagius' remaining forces, as Pelagius never gave up and instead fought to the bitter end, doing everything she could to hold on to a semblance of power, using necromancy to bolster her own forces, and in the end, unfortunately, she could not hold out. Well, unfortunately for her. And not even necromancy could prevent her kingdom of Solitude, now a land of death and necromancy, from being besieged and ultimately overrun by the forces of her brothers, Cephorus and Magnus. Now, if you want a more detailed overview of the entire war, again, I once more recommend watching my detailed video, which is in the description. But now it's time to talk about the freshly crowned Emperor, Cephorus Septim.
Cephorus Septim I was born 3E77 and had a seemingly undocumented childhood along with his brother Magnus. His turn upon the Ruby Throne was a long road of war and politics due to the effect the War of the Red Diamond had on the Empire. He had a fairly average life of royalty until the age of 21, where things began to change as he had become engaged to a Redguard woman named Bianchi, the Queen of Ghislaine. And just a year later, he attended the funeral of Antiochus, where Potema gave her infamous speech where she declared that Kintyra was not Antiochus's daughter, which led to Potema being banished from the Imperial court, and soon after the death of his uncle, he attended the coronation of Kintyra II. Before his imperial reign began, Cephorus was known as a kind and intelligent man, but he was also making a name for himself as a fierce warrior, as during the War on the Red Diamond, he had been leading his army to the front lines of High Rock, where some of the most brutal battles of the entire war took place. This war would continue to rage into the summer of 3E125 as Cephorus's army reclaimed western High Rock, and just 2 years later, all of High Rock had fallen under the power of Cephorus and his brother Magnus. After the War on the Red Diamond finally came to an end and Uriel III got snapped into a Slim Jim, Cephorus was soon after proclaimed the Emperor of Tamriel. As this new chapter in the Septim Dynasty begins, many of Uriel III's soldiers, royals, and other officials pledged their allegiance to Cephorus, but only if they received more independence from the Empire, to which Cephorus kindly agreed. But the end of the war would be a celebration short-lived, because the next decade of Cephorus's reign as Emperor would be dedicated to fighting off Potema's army of Daedra and undead. But during this decade, the Emperor's army had reclaimed all the territory her last few remaining allies had control over, until Potema was backed into a corner and Solitude was the only territory out of the Empire's grasp. And finally, after a month-long siege on the city of Solitude, Cephorus ended the nearly 2 decades of war by killing off Potema and the last of her troops in the Blue Palace. With Potema dead, Cephorus crowned his nephew Pelagius III king of Solitude, and just 3 years later would fall off of a horse and die just like that. And in his footsteps, his brother Magnus would carry on his legacy by taking his place at the Ruby Throne.
And Magnus would be the last remaining child of Emperor Pelagius Septim II to take the throne of Tamriel, with all his children, except for Potema of course, having had their turn on the throne after the tumultuous year of the War of the Red Diamond. Magnus, during his rule, proved to be a wise leader, and although he was very old and it cost him much of his energy, he spent a lot of his time trying to heal the wounds of the past and trying to mend the relationships with the former enemy vassals. It was a tiring task, but one that he kept working on during his entire reign, until his son Pelagius would succeed him after his death. And that son would be the infamous Pelagius III, better known as Pelagius the Mad. And for his story you'll have to go to part 2 of this video, which is on ItsTimeBomb's channel, where we will cover the crazy Emperor Pelagius the Mad and his antics, and of course the entire second half of the Septim Dynasty. A link to his part of the video is in the description and on the screen right now, so click it. And then I hope to see all of you there.